What's up guys, Jaden Irwin here. Welcome back to the YouTube channel. This is part 3 of the Sapling crash course. So if you haven't caught up quite yet, that's totally fine. Go ahead and watch those first 2 parts if you haven't yet. But in this part, what we're going to be doing is rendering Markdown to HTML, which is a pretty typical thing that you would want your framework to do, especially a framework that's designed for content-driven websites like Sapling. Let's just go ahead and jump into it. I first am going to do a little plug and say, if you haven't already, go to the Sapling mono repo on GitHub and give that a star. There is a link from the website up there in the top right corner. Makes it super easy to just go there and give it a star. So what we're going to be doing though is scrolling down, and we do have a Markdown package that is just first party. We will handle a basic implementation of rendering Markdown that most people would need out of that. And if they want something more advanced, you could obviously just look at the source code, which is in this case one file. That's pretty straightforward. And then you could obviously fork that and make your own implementation if you wanted to. But most people, this should cover your needs because we're using Marked. Marked is an awesome Markdown parser. It's really fast. I did several tests before I committed to one, and Marked was by far my favorite for speed. Shiki is also included in there. Shiki is an awesome package from actually the same creator of Uno CSS, which is built into Sapling. Really awesome developer, makes these great open source tools for us to use. I think Anthony is his name. So go to the Shiki package, give that a star as well, like I'm going to right now. And let's make sure Marked, I've also done the same. There you go. Live on camera, supporting. That's the easiest way that you could support a package that you're using. The more stars they get, the more it's followed, right? So that helps everyone. Go ahead and star all of those packages if you think about it and if you have the time. So let's go ahead and jump into this package though. It's really straightforward. It's very simple. You're importing a render Markdown function and you will get HTML from that. And then you just await that render Markdown function, pass in the Markdown. I could obviously add more documentation, but this is pretty straightforward stuff, especially once you see it implemented once or twice. Let's just go ahead and we are going to create a couple of sample Markdown files. And I'm actually going to have, this is one thing I want to do with these crash courses, and really just all my tutorials, is show people how I use Cursor, how I use whatever AI editor I'm using at the time to just be more efficient. Because I think a lot of creators are really like stiff arming AI. They don't want to use AI in their tutorials. But the reality is most of us are using Copilot or Cursor or something similar for most of our workflow. So I think you should talk about it. You should use it. It's a tool, right? So go ahead, and what we're going to do is let's do getting started. Actually, let's do something more interesting. Nature walk blog.md. Thoughts on sapling.md. And then I'm just going to go over to Cursor and I'm going to probably jump to ask. And this is a task that would be good for Gemini. Gemini tends to be pretty good at writing. So let's just go ahead and say, make content for both of these sample blogs. Front matter, right? Pretty typical for Markdown. Should have title, excerpt, and published at date. And we'll just start with that. Okay, I'm gonna make this a little bit bigger. And it might be a little bit lazy at first. We're gonna apply that to both of those, except write more, please. We're just gonna let the language model kind of hallucinate some things. A little bit better than lorem ipsum, I think. Okay, got some test content to work with. That's something that I would do if I was just scaffolding a little bit of content. I would jump into the AI and let it write some sample content that isn't lorem ipsum. It's a little bit better than that. Okay, so title, excerpt, and published at date. We could work on images. Probably in the next video, we're going to work on images because I've got some things that I want to cover around images with Sapling. But we've got content, and then let's go ahead and what we're going to do is we're actually just going to copy our about page. No point in starting from scratch if you can help it. So blog. And what we're going to do is we're going to go to another probably folder. We're going to go to utils and get blog files. .ts. Jump over here. We're going to go to the agent. And in my agent, I'm going to switch to Claude. And let's say I need a simple Dino script that gets the files from, let's reference them, content/files.md to make a blog index. So my text might be a little bit too big. I want to make it large enough that you guys can see it, but also small enough that you can actually see some content. Okay, let's see how Claude did. So we're going to, looks like it's not using that join, that's fine. And we're going to let that use the JSR. So let's do JSR standard walk. Okay, so it's at FS. There we go. Cool. So we've got the walk method. What that's doing is, let's just break this down rather than just trusting that it's working. But what we're doing is we're going to have an interface of blog posts. We've got get blog files, right? So this is a pretty straightforward function. We're going to walk through the content directory. So for each entry of Markdown, we are going to walk through, read the text file, extract the front matter, create a slug from the file, sort by publish date, and then it looks like this is going to console log. And let's go back to our agent. I want this to write a file blog index.json to content folder. It might might make more sense for this to be in our scripts folder. I know I put it under utils, but this is just a script that we're going to run to generate a blog index whenever we have new blogs. And you'll notice that I did in the naming of these, nature walk blog, thoughts on sapling. We might even rename that to just nature walk. That's the slug that we're going to use for the blog, right? So let's go back over here. Let's see what it did. Dino write file, content blog, index. Okay, that looks good. I'm not going to have it run the command. I'm going to do that myself. Dino run -a. So we're just going to allow all because I know what's in that file. I didn't write it, but AI wrote it. And then we're going to do utils get blog files. We could end up calling this something else, but that's fine for now. And there you go. So we've got a blog index.json. So the reason we're doing this is this makes it with a buildless system a much more efficient way to get the blog slugs. So you don't actually need it to look at your file system to get the information from the blog. Because you can imagine if this is requesting the blog index, this is requesting like the blog page, you don't want it to have to read through every single blog file that you have in order to generate just the title and the slug to get to that blog post. You need to have an index. And if you're using a headless CMS, you wouldn't run into this, right? Because a headless CMS is going to be an API where you can say, I want this blog on the API, right, by this slug name. Or I want all of my blog posts for the last year, right? Like you have more of an API. But in this case, because everything's local on this project, we actually do want to have a little tiny build script, and we're going to rename this to scripts. We want a little tiny build script that generates that blog index. So let's go ahead and close that. And we still got this running. Now we're going to go create a new context here. And actually I do want that blog index. Now I want the blog to list the blog posts from the blog index. So I know I talked about render Markdown at first, and we are going to get there, I promise. But you need to have a blog page, right? You've got to have a blog that links to those pages. So we're going to start there. Hopefully you're following along. Leave a comment below if you have any questions. Happy to help. Let's go here, and then we are going to go back to our index. We're going to go to site.getBlog. Let's make sure we import it. And we've got a little error there, import assert. So this is a JSON file. I believe it's with type JSON now. Let's go to our home page. Let's add a link to, cursor was already figuring out why we were there. Go to blog. There you go. And again, I'm not paying too much attention to the styles right now. We will get to that, but this is awesome, right? You've got a blog index that is imported from a specific file, and that's generated from a build script. So I know I'm talking about Sapling being a buildless system, and it is, because what I would do before I push these code changes, I would go write my new blog post. We could do a third blog post if we wanted. Nature Walk 2024, right? And then we could go back, and it looks like I don't have that command still there, but we would do dino run -a, and that was scripts. We're at scripts now. Get blog and files.ts. Files dot. There you go. So it rewrote that. If we go back to the blog index, we've got 3 now. And so I would have that third new blog post that I wrote, run this script, and then push the code changes live. And then we won't go down the path of, you can automate this completely in your GitHub Actions. Just mentioning that's a cool feature that you can do with GitHub Actions. You could have it look for changes to your content folder, and if there were changes, then it would run that little tiny build script that updates the blog index. Little side tangent there, where you're using a buildless framework, but then you have these little tiny scripts that run to just update little files or packages that need updated. Rather than the entire site is being built, only little parts are being built. There we go. And if I refresh that, we've got 2 identical, right? But 2 different slugs, and it actually has the slugs for those. You notice that if I hover over those, we do have the slugs right there on the blog. So now what we're going to do is go to pages, and we could actually do a folder. This is something that is totally up to you. It's not a file-based routing system. So we could just do blog. We could rename this to index.ts, drop that into blog. That's a pretty typical file system flow, right? And you could even call this slug.ts. This is like a very normal thing for file-based routing if you're used to Astro or Next.js, right? You can still do that convention if that is mentally easier for you to know what that file is. Absolutely, by all means, go ahead and do that. Sometimes I do that myself in my own projects. I'm just going to go ahead and lowercase those too, because that's going to bug me. So let's go back over here, index.ts. We're going to make sure all of those are updated. it's probably going to be mad about, the lower casing of things. That's just, it's a Mac OS issue that I've noticed. Not every computer does that, but for some reason Mac OS doesn't like when you rename, like, just lowercase a file. Side tangent there. But let's go back to the index. And this is actually /blog/index.ts now. Cool. So now let's go to this. We're going to do import HTML. And it's got the idea already. This is pretty straightforward to what we want, pretty close to what we want. Now, this is where we're going to go to a new folder. And this is actually going to be a util. It's not going to be a script. This util is get blog post. We've got stuff in the way here. Content. Okay. And so this is going to be a little build script. This, it's not even a build script. This function is going to go read the contents of the blog by the slug. Fetch the contents of the blog file by the slug. Let's make sure that we reference the page as well for some context and let it do its thing. I could show you guys like predefined functions, or we could do this manually, but this is a new way of working on a project with a tool like Cursor. It's how I would approach things in most cases, unless I already obviously had the function there to just copy paste. But I hope this kind of helps you guys see how to use these tools and just make yourself more efficient. And it's really going to understand the context of what's going on here. It should use the slug from the index.json instead of read the file. Actually, no, maybe I was reading that incorrectly. So it did get it right. So it's getting the slug, read text file, content, and then the slug.md. So that should work. If we go back over here, let's see, the agent did get that. So let's do blog. And we got to go back to our index. So you got slug, blog post, import that. And let's actually make this a function. So you can see that the autocomplete is getting us most of the way there. I just wanted to just jump ahead real quick, and then we'll explain what's going on. We've got site.get /blog, and then you've got this parameter for the slug. So that should be the slug of the actual blog. That should match your Markdown slug. And then we've got this const slug equals C, so our context, that's where you've got that context.html that returns the HTML for the request. And then you've got the c.request.parameter. And so that's the parameter that has slug here, right? So it's going to pass in that slug parameter from the request into the blog post function that we made. So then if we go over to our blog post function, it's got the params slug, and then the type is string, right? That probably makes a lot of sense to someone that has used Hono or used Express, or actually, honestly, Slug and all of that is pretty familiar for Astro and Next.js people, especially in this file-based formatting. But what you're doing in the index file is you actually are passing that manually in right there. So let's go back, let's refresh, and there you go. So this is just the raw text, right? So if we go back to our blog post, .title HTML, and then it's post.content, right? So the content, if we go back to our get blog post function here, markdown.trim. So it is literally just getting the markdown content and passing that back trimmed. So it's just the string, right? If we go and look at this blog post, we've got a little bit in here. Let's add some headings just so we can see this a little bit better. Let me make sure I'm on the right one. So thoughts on Sapling is the one that we're on. A little bit of markdown. Okay. So if you refresh, you're going to see that this is just the raw text. It's just the raw markdown. We still need to take this markdown content and render it. That's where we're going to go back over to our slug file, right? And this is where we're finally going to wrap up this part of the series. We're going to do render markdown from @sapling markdown. And now let's add that package. So we're going to kill that real quick. We're going to do deno add JSR @sapling markdown. There you go. You've got the package. We're going to go back and start our server again, and you've got render markdown. And what we're going to do up here in the area where you can do server things, get the blog post, we're going to actually render the markdown to HTML. And let's just console log it so you can see what that looks like. And we're going to refresh. Okay, that's not markdown yet, right? So we're going to go back here, console log rendered, but look at what we console logged. We've got HTML from that markdown. So that's good, but it's not rendering it. And the reason for that is this post.content is still just the regular content. And then if we go and do post.render, or just rendered is what we called it, const rendered, and refresh. Okay, we've got HTML, but why does this HTML kind of look funny, right? Why does it's still just normal text? And the reason why is Sapling does do, through our HTML escaping, we are safely making sure if you passed in HTML here, that it gets escaped. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Feel free to do your own research. But basically what we want to do is wrap this in a raw function. What we're doing, if you're used to React, React has a dangerously set inner HTML. I know it's a really scary function name because it's a scary thing that you're doing. And this is the same thing with this raw. You could imagine it being the same exact thing. So this raw method says, yes, I know that I'm putting HTML in this page, but I know what was generated. I know what this is. This is my markdown that's been converted to HTML. So now if we refresh, hey, look at that. We've got markdown that has been converted to HTML. And this is a blog, effectively. You guys just followed along with me. We made a blog that fully works. So if we go back over here, you can jump through those and you can see that is being rendered to HTML with p tags and h2s and h3s, and even the bold works right out of the box. And I'm assuming this is because, yeah, right there, we've got a pros Tailwind class already added on that wrapper. So that's why the styles actually look really good out of the box too, because Tailwind is built in with Sapling. So you can see there's not a lot. I know if you've been following along, this is 20 plus minutes, but we just essentially from scratch made a blog that renders and looks somewhat decent. Cursor did a lot of work there on the styles for us automatically, but yeah, like this is a live blog that you could just start writing your content in your markdown files and have those rendered with formatted dates and formatted HTML. We could actually go and wrap this. Let's do max width, screen, medium. Refresh. Okay, that looks good. Let's do max width, screen, medium on that as well. Looking better, more contained look. And then, like I said a little while ago, we'll talk about images in the next part, because images are a big part of working on websites and working on blogs, right? So we're going to add featured images to this, and I'm going to show you how you can actually have also a build script for your images. So you don't really have to think about images that much. You just have a source directory for your images, and then it spits out some formatted images in multiple sizes. So stay tuned. I know that's a little tease there, but yeah, hopefully you guys are following along, enjoying this. This is my favorite stuff, making fast websites in a simple way. This is just a lot of fun. So thanks for following along, and leave a comment below. If you're confused, if you're stuck, I'm happy to help. So we'll see you in the next one.